Hello, welcome back to my channel. So, yeah, I am nearing the end of my mid-semester break, and you know what? It's sad. But what's exciting is that I've also finished 3 books that I could talk about in this video, so I'm really excited about that also. In fact, I just finished 2 of those books yesterday, last night. One of them was a really short one, so of course, even if you're a slow reader, I suppose you could finish it quickly because it's really quite short. But anyway, I'm gonna start with the book that I actually began while I was still in KL. So this one is called Claire of the Sea Light, and this one is by Edwidge Danticat. So Edwidge Danticat is a Haitian-born writer, and this story takes place in Haiti, in a small town called Ville Rose, and it centers around this young girl named Claire Ligne Faustin, who disappears on her 7th birthday. And around the time when she disappears, there's also the death of a fisherman happening. And you may think that this novel would take us into, this deeper story of Claire, why she disappears, what is the circumstances around her disappearance, and, what are the motivations related to disappearance, what really happened, you may expect that this story would become some kind of a mystery, and you would expect that as you read through this novel, the mystery unfolds and you learn more about this disappearance. And that, I would say, is it's partially true. Because unexpectedly this book takes us into a totally different direction. There is also going to be a little bit of plot points that touches on the disappearance of Claire, but it swerves in a direction that was like totally unexpected for me. This was my first book by Edwidge Danticat, so I'm not sure if this is going to be her style, but because this is her first book that I've ever read, I was quite that direction took me by surprise, and I was actually quite happy about that. So how this novel actually goes is that after it talks about this disappearance of a young Haitian girl, we learn more about the individual stories of characters that are kind of exist in that town, the same town where Claire lives, but whose lives don't really intersect with her. A lot of these characters, the subsequent chapters, they focus on individual characters. For most of these characters, their lives intersect with each other. And it kind of makes you wonder why you learn more about these characters and how exactly they tie with the disappearance of Claire. You have this characters such as a young person who is quite a bit of an activist, idealist. You have the characters that are the head of a school, a radio program host, all of these characters, and yet for many of them you don't really know how they really play into Claire's life, Claire's story, and it does make you wonder a lot why the author decides to go into the stories, the individual stories of all of these characters in different chapters. And I would say by the end of this book, you would learn that this novel sort of ties them all, not necessarily in a very neat way, but there is a resolution and there is a certain direction where you feel like, yeah, there's a certain satisfaction that you can get once you finish all of the individual stories and how it eventually returns to Claire. Yeah, so I would say the non-linear structure of this book is something that I find really interesting because it complements really well the writing of this book. So first of all, the non-linear structure of this book, it plays around a bit with this concept of time, I think, because the stories are not necessarily written in a chronological order. And each of those chapters can be read individually as a short story, but if you read them from the beginning to the end, there is a certain sense of coherence, I would say, if you read them in that order. So yeah, it plays around with how you can perceive time, what happens first and what happens later, but at the same time, not necessarily things not necessarily have to be like viewed in this like really linear fashion. Like things jump around, things happen concurrently, and yeah, it feels just kind of fun to experience that in a book. This really small, tiny capsule of a time experiment, I would say. But on top of that, because of this kind of non-linear structure that feels kind of unconventional, I think it also highlights the poeticness of the writing of this book. For the most part, I would say that this book highlights imageries of death and life a lot. Those things happen, I would say, in pretty much all of the short stories. In fact, the beginning of this book starts with, aside from Claire's disappearance, with the death of a fisherman. So already we see, right from the get-go, some kind of death happening. And indeed, in this entire book, death is something that is going to keep happening, but you'll also see things related to life and livelihood and some of the efforts by many of the characters to make some kind of life for themselves. So it's going to also venture into the territory of social justice as well, criticisms of certain aspects of the society in Haiti, and also criticisms towards people in power, position of authority. So overall, I would say it's a very interesting book, a very interesting writing style. Aside from life and death, it also evokes a lot of imagery of beauty and violence, I would say. That kind of goes hand in hand with the whole life and death duality in this book. So yeah, in terms of the writing, I find it really interesting. It is fairly, I wouldn't say it's super experimental, but it is somewhat experimental, unconventional a bit. That makes it kind of exciting. So yeah, that's on the writing. I do think, however, the characters in this book, they are a little bit dull. I don't find them really memorable. And it got me thinking about why I would find these characters dull. This is a book that is a novel, but I think you can also read individual chapters as short stories. So in a way, you may say that this book is also a short story collection. And with short story collections, I usually look for some kind of coherence, but at the same time, some kind of individuality between the stories. So it is kind of like a, there's that balance that collections need to have, or novels that are based on short stories that need to have. What I find in this book is that The tone is very, very consistent throughout. All of the chapters have very similar tones, which makes sense, because it is a novel after all, so it makes sense for it to have like similar kinds of voice and tone throughout the entire book. But because each chapter focuses on a particular character, and the next chapter different character, next chapter different character, we don't actually get to spend a lot of time with one particular character. And with the short amount of time that we spend with each characters, and with how all of their stories are being told in this like really similar tone, it kind of makes all of those characters feel the same, even though a lot of them are radically different from each other. But the vibe that you get from reading the story itself feels kind of similar, if you know what I mean. And I think maybe that's why the characters don't feel very memorable, because aside from this knowledge that the characters are different, yes, but they don't evoke different kinds of emotions in me. So because the style, the tone, the pretty much the hue of the stories just feel very, very similar to me. So but overall, I think it is still a very nice book, and I am definitely going to check out more of her writings in the future. So I'm going to move on to the next novel that I just finished yesterday. I've always wanted to read this book after I read Bolla last year, and this one is by Pajtim Statovci. This is called My Cat Yugoslavia, and this book was originally written in Finnish. It was translated into English by David Hackston, and this book has a dual storyline. So one storyline concerns a young man named Bekim, who is Finnish at heart. I mean, he certainly has a Finnish citizenship, I would say. He's a Finn, but he's of Albanian descent. And what happens is that when he was really young, war happened in Yugoslavia, and so his family has to move out of Yugoslavia and migrate to Finland, where he pretty much lives and grows up. And this particular storyline talks about his struggle living in Finland as the son of immigrant parents, and the struggle that he faces in terms of how society perceives people like him, immigrants, his ethnic background, and how this has taken a toll on his mental well-being, so to speak. He constantly having had to face this the effects of having to grow up in this kind of environment where he feels like people like him is not welcome. And on top of that, he also had a bit of a rough childhood involving especially his father, where his father is someone who is somewhat abusive, and he definitely had experienced a bit of that, well, not a bit, a lot of that in his childhood also. And to top it all off, he's also gay, and all of these things contribute to a lot of this kind of self-doubt and self-loathing that we see a lot from this character in his particular storyline. And in that storyline, we see him purchasing a snake from a pet store. He's afraid of snakes, and yet he buys a snake, and so that kind of makes us wonder why he would do something like that. And after he does that, he keeps the snake at his home. He encounters a talking cat, who's a bit rude. And the story pretty much takes off from there, where we would soon see what he would do next. But definitely the main focus of this storyline is his, I would say, his struggle, his internal struggle to kind of, I would say, to live in a healthy way, to shed the baggage that he has had all his life. So that's the focus of the first storyline. Now the second storyline concerns Bekim's mother, who had to, like I said, who had to leave Yugoslavia because of the war. But the second storyline also talks about Bekim's mother. Her name is Emina. Emina's life before her marriage, when she's still a girl in Yugoslavia. And we see how that marriage happens, what happens when she first meets her future husband, and then how the marriage is like, and what happens during the war, what happens after the war when they move to Finland, pretty much the progression of Emina's life. And we will eventually see there are going to be parallel things that happen between Emine's storyline and also Bekim's storyline. So yeah, I overall think that this book is quite nice. I really enjoyed reading it. It is quite compulsive. It's quite a compulsive read. I came into this book expecting a little bit of, I would say, talking cat shenanigans, a bit of that kind of magical realism. I don't really consider it as magical realism, but something fantastical about the talking cat. And I was really looking forward to that. But I actually find out that after finishing the whole book, the talking cat part is probably the weakest part of this book. Because it is featured in a very limited space. Like, the talking cat does not happen throughout the entire book. And I felt like I was a little bit lied to. But yeah, definitely there is a talking cat, but it's not the best part, I would say. The best part of this book is actually how the author talks about the internal struggles, not only of Bekim, but also of Emina, and how they're pretty much having to juggle their existence with all of these baggages that they have to bring, that they have to carry, and they just can't really figure out how to deal with the baggage, the life baggage. And the way it is described, it is not something that is described in a really like nonchalant and like a very general way. It is described in this really specific and detailed way that you could almost imagine in how they feel. It's not like you could pretty much feel it very easy to sympathize with these characters. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And a lot of their baggage have something to do, obviously, with the war, the trauma associated with that, the violence that they have seen with Bekim's and Emina's case, the violence that they face not only with the war but also with an abusive family member, with how people view them as outsiders and foreigners, especially after they moved to Finland. And in Bekim's case, his kind of his sexuality is something that bothers him a bit also. And you're certainly going to see a lot of some of these the discussions of these packages within the characters being interpreted in kind of interesting ways in this book. I don't want to give up too much, but I personally do find it quite interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book. I'm not sure if the writer has other novels aside from this and Bolla. I think he has translated into English also. Yeah, gonna check those out if any. I think they are. So yeah, by the way, this book was also kind of like a recommendation by Meredith from reading with Meredith. I think that's the channel. That's the channel name. Or I think it's reading with Mary. Anyway, I'm gonna have the link down below. Yeah, she recommended this quite a while ago, and then I actually picked up this book, but then at that time I found it a little bit hard to read, and so I just sort of dropped it. And then I picked it up this week, and I enjoyed it. Yeah. Anyway, final book I want to talk about in this video. This one is by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is The Heart of a Dog. And this book was originally written in Russian. It was translated into English by Glenny. This is my second Mikhail Bulgakov. The first one was The Master and Margarita, which I really love. I thought that book was really rich. It was epic. This book is very short. It's only 128 pages long, and I would say it's quite funny. It's very interesting, very offbeat, I would say. So this book is about how a professor, his name is Filip Filipovich, let's see. Come on. Oh, here we go. Filip Filipovich Preobrazhensky? I think that's that's the name of the professor. And this story takes place in the 1920s, and we see how this professor finds a dog, a really scraggy mongrel dog, and operates on this dog, giving this dog human pituitary gland and also human testicles. And after the operation, how this dog named Sharikov, transforms into this human-ish characters, and the repercussions of that transformation is just really wild and hilarious. Basically, we end up with a creature with the consciousness of a human, but with the desire and tendency and inclination of dogs, such as this uncontrollable desire to attack cats, for example. So yeah, it is a really interesting book despite its length, and it reminds me a lot of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but obviously a bit more hilarious, a more hilarious take off than that. You're gonna see a lot of critiques by this author towards the society he lives in at that time. And honestly, it's not exactly something that is really surprising, considering that, after reading the introduction, the author's life isn't exactly like the most breezy life you could imagine. Yeah, so you could definitely get a lot of snark in this book, a lot of biting comments, I would say, towards towards the Russian society at the time. This is a very fun book, but yeah. I finished it very quickly last night, and I thought that it was great, but at the same time, because of its really short length, I feel like I wanted more. But then again, it is also a very self-contained story. It feels like it has talked about enough of what it wants to say. But somehow there's something about this book that I feel like I want more of. And I think that it may have something to do with how this author takes this absurd imageries and put it into his novels, and that I find kind of irresistible. So that means the only solution to that would be to read more of his books. So yeah, this is a very interesting one. Definitely recommend this one to you guys. And yep, and that wraps up all of the books I want to talk about in this video. And I guess I'll see you again in a different one. I don't have any video plans so far. Do you have any suggestions? But in any case, I will return, hopefully, and I'll see you then. So, until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye!